See that here? That's Z90 ASRock. That is Z90 ASRock motherboard as well. How the heck do you know what's the difference and which one should you be getting? And there's Intel and AMD motherboards. Which one is better? How do you even choose the motherboard? Some of them are B, Z, X, Q. In this video, I'm going to be showing you how to choose a motherboard as a creator, and well, perhaps actually before choosing the motherboard, you have to choose something else first. Let's go. So we're going to be diving deeper into everything that comes with this Z790 Nova from ASRock in a minute. But before you even start with choosing the motherboard, you're going to have to choose your CPU platform. And here's what I mean by that. I've created these beautiful two pieces of paper to explain different chipsets of the motherboard. You might choose an Intel 13600K, for example, a great chip. There's not just Z790 motherboards that support that CPU. There's actually a lot more different chipset motherboards, and it can be very confusing because you can look at a B660 and a B650 motherboards and they're completely different, and one supports AMD, one supports Intel. Let's take a look at AMD first. So AMD has three different chipsets of motherboards. The X is the top chipset motherboard, and here's how you can remember that X is from AMD. Elon Musk, everything's called X. Twitter, their Teslas, SpaceX, everything's X. Even the kid, I think it's called X something. And Tesla uses AMD CPUs in their Teslas, so that's why X, Tesla, you know, AMD, that's kind of how it makes sense. X. There's no X on Intel, but X on AMD. Is this the reason why Elon Musk chose AMD as well? Then this second number here, this represents the different series of the motherboard. If it's 6, it's newer than 5, and 4, and 3, and 2, and 1, if that makes sense. Then the top one is always called X670. So these two go together here as well. And then so do these two kind of go together in there. It's a random thing there. Now, AMD's new version of motherboards also has an E here, and that's why this is in brackets, because E just means a little bit more stuff on the motherboard. But what you need to remember is also that all of these chipsets both support Ryzen 7000 CPUs, because that's one of the latest ones right now. But they will also support future ones. And you have to check out, what does this particular chipset, which CPUs does it support? Because some of the earlier ones might actually support later ones. Now, if we're looking at Intel's side on here, then you can see that Intel has Z, which is the top of the line of motherboard chipset. Then we have B, which is confusing because AMD also has B as there's like secondary tier motherboards. And then we have H further down. AMD has an A further down, and then we have Q. You don't really need to remember the Q because that's not for a lot of people. If you're a creator, most likely you're going to stick with the top 2 range there. Then the second number also means the generation of the chipset. So 7 is later than 6, 5, 3, and so on. This secondary number always, for Z motherboards, doesn't actually change ever. The Z7, this 90, there is no Z760, okay? There's Z790, that's always 90, and AMD's is always 70. I don't know why. Then the B is B, 7 means the series, and then you have 60 always together there as well. Now with H, it actually gets a little bit complicated because you can get H 610 or 710 here as well if you needed to. But these two numbers here can change. But for B and Z, they don't change. Now, you can pretty much forget everything below B for now, because if you really want to save some budget, even the B, like 660, there's very budget motherboards affordable out there. So there's no reason to go further down because you're going to start to lose some of the memory overclocking and other features in there. But if we focus on these two, with Intel, it gets a little bit more complicated because Intel usually has 1 or 2 generations of CPUs for the same platform. So for example, if we're looking at Intel's 12th gen, 13th gen, and 14th gen, which is actually a little bit of an anomaly, exemption, because often you have just 2 generations of CPUs, and often a new motherboard chipset comes out with the same CPU as well. But the chipset kind of supports the last two, if that makes sense. So for example, this latest 12, 13 and 14 gen are all supported on a Z6 and Z7 and, you know, all of the 6 and 7 motherboards, okay? So for now, I'm gonna call it Z6 and Z7 motherboards here, okay? But then if you're looking at the 11th gen and then the 10th gen, then those CPUs were actually supported on the Z5 and Z490 motherboards, if that makes sense. So with the 10th gen, they came out with a Z490 and then with 11th and Z590, but the CPUs are actually supported on both of them. So you can put a 10th gen on a Z590 and 11th gen on a Z490, but sometimes the mix and match might not be the best because one motherboard might support Gen 4, for example. So if you put a 10th gen on a Z590, you might not get some of the Gen 4 speeds or something like that on those motherboards. So that's a little bit of a confusing thing, and that took forever for me to actually learn and understand what is AMD, what is Intel, and like how do these compare, especially when we are looking at, from AMD we have a B650 and from Intel we have a B660 motherboards, and they're completely different. They're both like the B series, but one is Intel, one is AMD. Was it the 50 or was it the 60? Which one was Intel? It can be confusing, but hopefully this was a little bit of a clarification on that. Now we did check out the ASRock Phantom Z790 Riptide Wi-Fi out, and this Nova is actually a further higher tier. So let's take a look what this Nova then offers for us. Okay, as always, ASRock again has packed their motherboard really, really well. So inside we have a temperature probe. We have some standoffs for the M.2 screws, M.2 screws, and standoffs, some more standoffs. You got a keycap, Riptide Gaming or Phantom Gaming, some more screws, a sticker, manual, which is very, very helpful. 2 SATA cables. We have an ARGB extension cable and a splitter cable. So you can split the ARGB to 3, so 1 female to 3 male cables, another temperature probe, another temperature probe, so 3 temperature probes all together, a GPU holder, sag bracket, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, it's a GPU sag bracket that you can mount onto the motherboard, which is quite interesting as well, and a Wi-Fi antenna that you can attach there. There's a sticker, 2-sided sticker underneath, so you can actually glue that in. So this shipping packaging actually must take quite a lot of work from them to actually zip tie these all together. These must be human-made zip ties. I don't think a robot could do that. First thing I notice is the back plate. You can see that the back is now covered. That's what usually comes with the higher end motherboards. There's a little bit more protection on the back just in case you put the motherboard like on your PC case or something like that. You're not going to shave any of the SMDs off because most of them are covered here, as you can see here. And we've got a nice Nova sign here as well. So this is quite interesting. Firstly, we've got quite beefy heatsinks here for the VRMs. And this is what you get better on the higher end motherboards as well. And this is one of them. You get 20+1+1 power stage, which is 90 amperes power stages and smart power stages, which is just basically overclocking. And for creators, really, that doesn't mean a lot because it will provide a lot of power and clean power for all of your CPUs, even if it's a 14900K. But if you use things like a multi-core enhancement and want to get as much power from the CPU as possible, then having a better and cleaner power delivery is always better, and it's not going to like cap your CPU because they overheat and can't provide the power anymore. They actually have a fan underneath there. You can see there's a little opening on the side here, and there's a heat pipe that goes and makes contact on all of these VRMs in there. Now the design is pretty nice. We've got a black and purpley, blue and kind of pink design going on in there. And let's take a look at some of these motherboard features then, what we can see here. So in terms of power connectors, on the top we have 2 8-pin EPS or CPU connectors, 1 ATX power connector in there, and that is it, nothing extra. Then we have some PWM headers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 on the side here. So So that's where you connect your AIO pumps and fans. Then we have RGB headers. We've got two 5-volt RGBs on the top there. We have another 5-volt underneath here and another 12-volt in here. Don't try to mix and match them. You can't really, but 12-volt will cook a 5-volt, RGB fan, for example, and vice versa. Then we have a Dr. Debug in here to see the post codes. That is extremely helpful when something's not working on your PC and you're like, what's going on? I don't know where the problem is. This will usually tell you, okay, the problem is with your CPU's not seated, or DRAM, one of these channels, or something else, a power connector, or somewhere is the problem. Then moving ahead, we have some front panel connectors. So we have Type-C in here and then two Type-A ports. The Type-C port here is USB 3.2 Gen 2 X2 slot, which supports up to 20 gigabits per speed. So for example, if you have something like the Samsung T9 external SSD, then if you connect it and your front panel actually supports it, you can get 20 gigabits per second actual speeds there. Then we have two Type-A ports in here. So if you've got one of those cases that has lots of front panel headers, these both support up to 5 gigabits per second speeds. We have 4 SATA ports in there. We have a TPM header in here. Then we have ESPI debug header in there, UART header, and then we have a front panel header here with all what you need in the front panel, whether it's speakers, power buttons, LEDs, all that. And we have two solid power and reset buttons. So if you are using this for overclocking for gamers, or even for creators sometimes, I don't suppose creators should be doing overclocking, but it's nice that you don't have to use your screwdriver like that in there. You can just power them on in there. 3 sensor headers, what we got in the motherboard box, you can put in there. 1, 2, 3. We have two USB 2.0 headers. We have a Thunderbolt header in here and a HD audio header in there. One of the main things for a high-end motherboard, what you don't usually see on the lower one and what you didn't see on the Riptide, was the debug for all the post codes, as well as these power buttons and some of the front panel headers. And you can see there as well the headers, and usually IO is going to get better. But this motherboard has something more up its sleeve. So it does support 12th, 13th and 14th gen of CPUs in there. Out of the box 14th gen support, and here you can see the socket, no pins bent, which you shouldn't expect that, but they've got a nice metal in there as well, black metal. Can you see that? Then we've got DDR5 slots in here, and it does say on the motherboard that it supports up to 7,800 mega transfers per second, but it's not the motherboard that's the main concern when trying to reach these RAM speeds. It's the IMC on your CPU. So if you do want the highest speed of RAM, or making sure that it runs, especially if you're running 4 sticks, then go with the 14th gen of CPUs, and then most likely you're going to get better. Then we've got some M.2 expansion slots, which gets very interesting, and this is why perhaps this may be for creators. So firstly, this top slot is toolless design. So we just slide it this way, push it there, then it comes up, and then voila, we have the heatsink off. Top heatsink is off. Then let's take these screws off. There's a lot to screw here. This is the bottom heatsink. We've got thermal pads on the top. Then we've got this main heatsink. Oh, something's still stuck. There we go. Again, thermal pads on the top. And then we have this side one here. And again, thermal pad on the top. And if you've already noticed and counted all those slots, there are 6 M.2 slots that you can put into this motherboard. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then 6, which is absolutely insane. So let's talk about those M.2 slots there. The naming of these are like this. That's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Very logical. And if you want to get full speed of them, there is only one switch that's going on between this first M.2 and then this PCIe 5.0 slot in here. So perhaps we have to talk about the expansion slots a little bit first. This top slot is X16 slot, PCIe Gen 5 that comes from the CPU. If you have an M.2 installed on the top slot there, which supports PCIe Gen 5 X4 M.2 SSDs, this slot in here starts to run in X8 speed. Then we've got another expansion slot in here. This is PCIe Gen 4 X4 slot, so you can't actually run 2 GPUs in here. And then we've got a PCIe Gen 3 X1 expansion slot on the bottom in here. These other 5 M.2s, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all run PCIe Gen 4 X4 speeds, and you can get all full fat speeds if you wanted to. The only thing is, if you want to run the SATA M.2 SSDs, they are only supported on the 5th slot in there. So that is quite impressive actually, to get that full speed of all of these M.2 SSDs, loads of storage, and really don't have any switching there. Usually you'd lose some of these or some of the other connectivities, but they have taken away some of the expansion slots, which you don't actually need. Like how many people run 2 GPUs in something like that? So it's very thought through, which is impressive actually. Regarding the DDR5 speed, the box says 7,800 megatransfers per second, but it can actually support up to 8,000, probably even higher if you want to. Now, another interesting thing is that this top heatsink cover here actually can be removed through these 2 screws on the side. So here underneath we can see the fan and then some RGB that goes onto this heatsink in there. But the other interesting bit is this here. This is the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth card here, but that's actually an M.2 card, so potentially you can actually change it. So this is slot into the socket, so if you wanted to upgrade that later to, I don't know, even better Wi-Fi 7 card or something like that, you can do that, which is interesting. And ASRock really gives you the option there. You can see they're cooling it down with this little thermal pad here, so that this gets cooled down there as well. By the way, if you're enjoying this t-shirt design, go check out technoticstore.com for some merch. There's a few different designs available, different colors. Feel free to check them out and use the code Lauri, L-A-U-R-I, to receive 10% off. So one last thing to check out is the I/O of the motherboard. And that's another thing that is a lot better with some of the higher end motherboards than lower end motherboards. Because the better the chipset, the better I/O and features they can give. You can get better M.2 support. For example, this one had 6 M.2 SSDs. That one there, only 5. And that is quite a lot as well. Some of them 4 lower end ones, then 3 or 2. So that depends which motherboard you're gonna go for. So what we can see on the top here is HDMI and display port output. So that comes from the iGPU of the CPU. If you've got an iGPU in there, so a non-F variant of CPU, you can get a video output in there as well. So even if you don't have dedicated GPU in here, you can get dual monitor support with just this motherboard. We have a clear CMOS button in there. We have 2 USB 2.0 ports in there. And then we have some ASRock Lightning gaming ports in there, which are basically just dedicated chips for those. So you're not going to have them in the hub and you're going to get the lowest latency. So that's really for gamers. If you really want really good feedback and low latency for your keyboard and mouse, you probably want to put them in there. But interestingly, these 3 ports here are 5 gigabits in speed, but this bottom yellow one here is actually 10 gigabits in speed, with another 10 gigabit USB type A port in here, as well as these 2 10 gigabits there. So these colors are a little bit confusing. I wish there was a little bit of better color coding so we can see there. Plenty of 10 gigabit ports there, and then another 20 gigabit type C in there. So that is 3.2 Gen 2 X2 slot. Again, if you've got one of those external SSDs or devices that support that. We have a 2.5 gigabit LAN. I wish we had 10 on one of these higher end ones. And then we have Wi-Fi 7, which is very, very interesting. And I'm very, very excited to see more Wi-Fi 7 devices and routers and things coming out there, because I really like to see what's the maximum transfer speed that we could get over wireless. So perhaps you might not be able to access all of those files wirelessly. Perhaps you don't have a wired connection over 10 gigabit Ethernet. Then Wi-Fi 7 offers up to 46 gigabits per second connection over Wi-Fi 7, which it's very, very interesting actually. And Bluetooth 5.4. Then we have optical output there, as well as microphone and line out ports there for your audio. So as you can see, when comparing this higher end motherboard to the lower end motherboard, you can see that there's more features, and that's what often happens when going up with the chipset, whether it's going from A to B to X or H to B to Z, you can see you're getting more things. Even when you go within the Z, there's different prices of the Riptide versus the Nova. You can see you get more features. You get more M.2 slots, you get better support, you've got more debug codes, you got some more features in terms of like monitoring your hardware and some more power deliveries as well as better I/O. So that's all what you get extra with the motherboards. Now, there's a fine line actually what you need with like some of the upgrades and what you don't, because sometimes they slap a lot of things on there that might be good for you as a gamer, or if you want overclocking a PC enthusiast, you might want some of these debug and a lot of sensors and these buttons on the motherboard. But if you're a creator, these might not mean a lot to you. A much more valuable feature is the 6 M.2 slots, and perhaps that's why you might want to go with this instead of some of the creator motherboards that actually have only 4 M.2 slots, and you might want to go with this one instead. If you're interested in checking this one out, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. And if you're wondering which PC to build as a creator, then there's build guides for you in the description below. Completely free, whatever your budget is, go check them out. Thanks guys for watching. Bye bye.